start this panel discussion. And first, I would like to introduce my panelists. We have Anna Gilmet here. She is an architect, activist, and representative for House Europe in Sweden. Further, we have Tove Jörgensen. She's also an architect and activist and representative of ACAN, and that's the Architects Climate Action Network. And then finally, we have Julie Svensson, and she is a journalist and working for Sydsvenskan as a culture journalist. And yes, exactly. And yeah, as well, architecture critic, if we can say so. Exactly. So thank you so much for being here. And I would like to start this discussion maybe with you, Anna. You have been touring right now a lot with House Europe and trying to understand, like, to show this movie. You've been showing it around. And what is maybe the most relevant that we can take from the movie and from your experience in being in so many different panel discussions and working with this, yeah.
Well, I think that an important point is that we are doing this project across the European Union, so all the member states, and there are different issues in every country, so it doesn't look the same in Sweden that it does in Italy or in Belgium or in France. So it has been very interesting to kind of see what are the issues raised in each context. And often in Sweden, I feel like a lot of people don't see this as an issue in the same way that it is maybe in France, where a lot of social housing projects have been demolished in the last years. So I would like to start by pointing out that one of the main problems in Sweden, and I think it will go into that as well, is that we don't have a lot of data about demolitions because they are not being followed up in the same way that in other countries. We only count demolition of housing, and ACAN has been doing a very good job on mapping demolitions in Sweden. And as we see also here in Lund, there are a lot of planned demolitions, and there is also a kind of political debate ongoing in Sweden from across the political spectrum, from like the Swedish Democrats to the Social Democrats, about what they call targeted demolitions. So this is up in the agenda. It's maybe not happening in the same scale than in other countries yet, but this is something that it's sort of like coming here. And so I think it's very important that we start discussing this before it's like already seeing the consequences.
And maybe if I can ask Tove, why do you think is in Sweden maybe the demolition more a default? Is it like regulations, costs, or mindset maybe? Why is it in Sweden not as debated maybe as much?
That's an interesting question that I do not know the answer to, but I have some ideas. One thing I think is that, as they were saying in this movie, in Europe it's most common with small firms, or like the majority of people working in the building sector, small firms, and that is not at all true when it comes to Sweden. We have some giant companies, both like architects and engineers and constructing companies, and they very much set like the agenda. And obviously, the bigger you are, the easier it is to like do efficient work with like a clean slate and demolishing and building new. If you are a smaller actor, it's easier to take on small jobs and maybe just partial demolition or rebuilding and these kind of things. I think that can be one aspect of it. And then I also think that we do have like on a more kind of personal level or individual level, a culture with where renovation is very much like everyone does renovation. We have all these like TV shows for decades now, like you know, both about architecture, but talking to like people who live in these houses, doing all their own projects, but also like this, like fixing. I forgot the name. I grew up with this, you know, like Martin Timell, like yeah, yeah. I think those are two aspects that could play into it.
And Julia, maybe from a more like you being a journalist, how do you see this also reflected in like the culture, and is there maybe a shift towards that, to more understanding of the
Media?
Yes.
Yeah. I can see like every big newspaper, like we at Sydsvenskan, we have a climate journalist, for example, who are interested in these questions. But then it's also a question like media reports on news, you know. So every time we have this maybe stadsbyggnads vad heter det, kommunfullmäktige, no, when plans are taken, then we present in the media, these are the new plans, we show maybe the vision, the renderings of new plans, and then it's not really that we ask these questions, you know, it's not the way we do that kind of journalism. And that's a thing that might have to change, but then we also have to like have the news, what is new. If you are mapping like all these buildings have been demolished, or this will be the future new buildings or demolishing projects, then there would be a report on that. Do you see what I mean? It's not, yeah. So, for example, if when we listen to the people from the municipality, it's like when they take on a plan, they can say that, yeah, this, now it's like that Malmö, where I live and work, are quite positive to renovation and to keeping buildings. But it's still like they take on plans with demolition because it's plans that have been planned for years and just to make things going, you know. But we might see a shift there in 5 years if we have still the same majority with the the Green Party, and so in Malmö, then maybe there will be they won't take on these plans for demolishing anymore. Yeah. Let's hope that.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I can ask Anna again. We have maybe this connotation of an old building being inefficient, and that we equals also that a new building fulfills the modern standards and regulations. Are those facts, or is it just a perception?
There is this phrase that I actually don't know exactly who said it first, because a lot of people say they said it first. That is that the most sustainable building is the one that is already built. And I think this is something that is very important to raise awareness about, because there is an idea. When we started working with House Europe, we did a survey for like, let's say, normal people, not architects. And a lot of people, we asked them, what is more sustainable, to keep an existing building or to build a new building that is up on the standards of energy use and materials and so on. And most people answered that the new building is more sustainable. And this is not true, because, as it was explained in the film, all the CO2 that was used when the building was built for the structure, the concrete, all the materials that are resources that we cannot take anymore, because some of the, for example, this building that has been now transformed and renovated, most of the things we see here would be impossible to build today, because the cost of the materials has gone up so much because these materials are more scarce. So if we actually count the materials that were used once when the building was built, it will never be more sustainable to demolish this and build something new, even if that would be made of wood. And there are several studies where when this is considered, you always get that the more sustainable is the already built. And this is why part of the proposal that we want to bring to the European Union is that the emissions of a building should be counted using LCA system, which is the life cycle assessment, and that this includes all the emissions that were made when the building was built.
Maybe to that also, sometimes when we assess a building and we say, okay, it has this energy class, an old building will always perform worse than a newly built and climate zero, let's say, building. Is that also something that we should maybe change or like think by renovating and making conscious choices, we can set up the standard as well of those buildings?
Yeah, of course. And this is being done also a lot. And this is also why, although in Sweden it's a little bit particular because most buildings have a better energy standard than in the rest of Europe. When we say that we want to upscale renovation, we are meaning this kind of renovations where the energy consumption of the building can be reduced through like insulation and other things that we can do to this is perfectly possible to be done. And that maybe, and this is where like local regulations also come in place, we maybe have to think also a little bit different about what we see as a good standard, and where maybe we can put in the balance other things, because for example in Sweden it's quite hard to renovate because there are a lot of regulations, for example about the height of ceilings and so on, that make it hard to, for example, make an office building into housing. And we have a lot of office space in centrally located part of the city that is empty and that could be made into housing. And there are several examples of how this can be done. And this is kind of the power I think we have as architects, to the fact that we can show how something can be done. We can show existing projects where office has been converted into housing. It has been done in large scale in Brussels and in Amsterdam. And this is kind of like tangible proof that we can work in a different way, and that maybe we can give up on certain things, making exceptions, because it doesn't mean that in new building we also have to have a lower standard, but it can mean that we can make certain exceptions in transformations so that we can keep these buildings and have more housing and use the space that is already there.
Thank you so much. And maybe Tove, to you, tying into the narrative of the architect that have to reframe this way of thinking. How can we, as architects, make it understandable that reuse is also desirable and visionary as good as a new building?
I think primarily through this kind of like storytelling that they all also were talking about in this movie. I think that's a good point. Like we are taught from this when we study to become architects, it's very, very important how you tell the story of the project, how it's developed, and this kind of storytelling is something that architects are very trained to do. And I think that we need to like kind of make ourselves a new story, like we need to create new stories to sell. And I also think that we need to become much better in like seeing values other than economic values, and not like agree to just not accepting this economy as the only parameter by which we do everything, because it is actually like that. It trumps everything. In the end, it's just like, I mean, I am sure that most people want to do better projects and do good by society and everything, but if it comes to a choice between profit and these other values, profit always wins. And but there, I think we do have a job in like pushing and making our clients and the society see like the values in the existing buildings. That, as you were saying, some of these can't be built again. At least not within like the building system as it looks now, and within this economic system. So really raising the awareness and like make sure that everyone understands how valuable these existing buildings are. And like going beyond aesthetics, I think that's really important, as we also saw with this big housing complex in Amsterdam, that like it might be a building that not everyone likes the look of, but that should not be the most important thing here, because we are in a climate crisis and we need to take it for real, like serious shit. Yeah.
And I guess the media as well has a role in that. I mean, Julia, you just wrote an article about how there was an exhibition in the Architecture Center in Copenhagen. And I guess that ties also into that we as architects should try to convince the developers. But what do you think, what could your role be in the same discussion? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm first going to reply what you said, Tove, because I think it's interesting. I think also architects should do the economics, because that's the only language that works with the clients, mostly. You have to, because if you say, like the movie said it very well, how much value there already is in those buildings. And if you count, you have to count on like everything, just not only the short-sighted gain of economics, but like all of it. And then I think the question will be another, the economic result will be another if you bring in like all of it. And that's maybe a thing that we have to change the way that we count. So we also have to count like climate value, or so make that a part of the economics. That's one thing. And then I don't buy the thing with the aesthetics. Maybe I'm a bit brainwashed, but I thought like the apartment in that Amsterdam house, they were really nice. So I think it's just a part of an education. And if all the renovation shows on TV, it could show a little bit more of these projects, people will buy it and they will like it and see that and start to think that this is attractive. So I think that's a change we have to also make. In this exhibition I saw in Copenhagen about the reuse, there was the Danish king and queen. They were presenting their new summer cottage, or there was an extension of their summer cottage where they had used only like reused recycled material and stuff. And they were going in as role models. And that, I think, maybe you can make Victoria and Daniel do that as well in Sweden. I don't know. So make it a more ordinary taste. The media role, show it a little more, I think.
Make more aware and show nice examples maybe as well of how it's well done. And I guess if we talk about successful policies, but also what do you think, Anna, is what are existing policies in other European countries that we don't have here in Sweden that somehow make it more successful to renovate and it more palpable, like in the Netherlands and in Belgium?
Well, when we were looking at these proposals, we did a sort of study across Europe to see if there were existing policies in the European countries that we could be sort of inspired by. Amsterdam is an interesting case because they actually targeted specifically this idea of converting office to housing. And I cannot really go into the details of all of this, but I think they just like did a very thorough understanding of what needed to come into place for this to happen. Italy is also a case where renovation has a lower tax than new construction, and this is a way to incentivize renovation, and it has actually worked because in Italy 80% of the building sector is into transformation and only 20% is in new construction. So this is why this is also part of the proposal. And one other thing we looked into is the fact that one of the main issues is that when basically you're going to do a project, a developer is going to do a project, and they need financing for this, they go to a bank and they request financing. And a new construction by the banks is seen as a less risky business than to transform, because there is a sort of idea that we need to change because there is no actual like foundation for this, that there is more risk, that more things could happen with an existing building. But if instead we would look at all the potentials with the existing building and not just do an evaluation that is based on the risk, then banks would also be more willing to borrow money for transformation. So this has been done in Brussels, and this has had a big effect as well. In Brussels, the whole like building sector is also changing a lot towards transformation. And you have also a kind of similar situation in Amsterdam, where the European Union has a lot of office space that they are now selling out because they don't need it anymore. And a lot of this is now being repurposed because there is incentive to do this.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe now I'm opening up a bigger question, maybe to all of you. We have local examples in Lund and in Malmö where we have existing relatively new buildings that are being torn down, as for example the hospital here in Lund, which is in plan to be like a new hospital should be built, and then afterwards the old one should be torn down. And the same is happening as well in Malmö for the stadium, the old stadium. Also relatively new building, but it will be torn down soon. Of course, we tie into again that like for the hospital, for example, a big part of the debate has been that it is not as efficient, like an old building from the 60s, 70s. It can't live up to the standards that we have nowadays. But is there, like, what could we have done differently if it's already too late? Or what can we do differently?
I hope that it's not too late. But I think it is crucial to understand the time, like the point in time where we are now, that we are still doing things. Now I'm just talking out of from a climate perspective, right? We are still doing things pretty much business as usual. And we know that we can't continue doing that if we want to live in a society that stays within the planetary boundaries. So we know that we need to change, and we are not doing it. We are not like on track yet, or we don't really know how to do it, or we haven't implemented it. And then I believe that it's crucial to not take on these like huge new projects that will take decades and like cost massive amounts of money. These like big visions that are like fooling us into thinking that okay, everything is going to be good, but when it's going to be done, it's probably it could be already outdated. We might have like different needs. We don't know the society we will live in then, and if we just do this big, like either if it's demolitions or repurposing of the old buildings and building new ones, like the massive amount of resources that we're using and emissions that we're putting out there, if we postpone it a bit or like we take smaller steps, we might be able to do it much better within the coming years. That's my hope for it. So I think it's like dangerous to rush things now, because I think that I mean, if you want to be hopeful and see that we will be able to do things better, I think we need to also realize that we are not doing it now, but we might soon. Yeah.
Now, I would like to add that, I mean, because there is this whole climate discussion, of course, about the CO2 emissions of demolishing, the CO2 emissions of building new, and so on. But there are also other things that get lost when we demolish. And I read a little bit about this project of the hospital. I'm not like super into the details of why this is happening, but the new hospital will be built in an area where there are already also buildings that will also be demolished. Yeah. And these buildings are part of sport associations that don't know where they're gonna move to. And in Lund, there is an example of how things can go another way. That is in Norra Fälladen, where there was a plan from the municipality to demolish housing and other buildings in this area, and the neighbors organized and prevented this from happening. So in Norra Fälladen now they're not gonna demolish. So it's not too late, let's say, and there could be maybe for people who are here that live in Lund, possibility to do things differently and organize, and maybe getting together with the sports associations and see if there could be other possibilities of how this could be done, because I have also seen that there are alternative plans where maybe parts of the hospital could be demolished and built new, and others could be kept. So I think that we shouldn't kind of think also that these plans, because they have been worked on for decades or because they sit in a document that the municipality has written, that they are set in stone. We should kind of think of this as something that is created every day, and that we are still we still have a possibility of changing this, because in the end the city is what we all make of it, and not what only what the municipality or the investors or so on want to do with it.
We also have to be aware that the land where the hospital is in Lund, it's really central, it's really expensive and attractive. There will be lots of firms who would love to develop it and make housing and offices that they will sell expensive. So we also have to have those arguments ready to why we have to rethink maybe a part of this. I think that having a hospital in the central part of the city is a really good thing. It makes us feel safe, for example. And if I have something to be done at the hospital, it's nice. You can walk there from the city. You can, it's to move out at Smörlyckan, it will be a lot more far, not as walkable, for example. And
Yeah, and I think to add to what you were saying, it's important to kind of look at the bigger picture and try to understand why these things are done. The same goes, for example, in Gothenburg with Valhalla, that everyone is saying, why are you demolishing this building? It's beautiful building, and there could be other ways of doing this. And I think the first thing for us, everyone, is to understand why this is done. And this is also like what I think is explained in the movie. So in order to have a discussion on the same level where we understand that the reason why this is done is economic, and it's not because they want a better city or they want a bigger arena, all these things can be done in different ways. The reason why this is done is, like you're saying, because the value of the land there is much more than what they think the hospital, having a central hospital, can give. So when these things are put in the balance, the fact that the land is expensive is more important than the fact that people can walk to the hospital. So this is also about how we see value in our society.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe also. Yeah, please.
As you say, economical, but also political. Like, it's a good thing for politicians to be able to say that they're gonna like build this new, beautiful, perfectly efficient hospital. So I would say it's also like marketing for themselves.
I was just thinking about the value, also in the sense, for example, the stadium in Malmö, it is very iconic architecture. It's this very brutalistic concrete building. Maybe we can talk about that value a bit as well, like the emotional value that a building contains or has. How can that be somehow be made accountable as well in this equation?
I think in that it's a little bit what we were mentioning before, but it's about also how we can maybe talk about these buildings in a different way, because maybe there is a sort of idea that architects have a sort of bad taste, and there is kind of an ongoing debate in not architecture circles, actually more like broader in society in Sweden, about which buildings are beautiful, which buildings are ugly. And a lot of these discussions centered on aesthetics is kind of forgetting about the people who use these buildings, who live in these buildings, and who also might not feel very nice about their living spaces spoken in this way. Yeah. And in that, I think we need to kind of, maybe together with media and together with other actors, kind of find other ways to talk about buildings in a different way, because I think, like it was mentioned in the movie as well, it's not about the buildings. Many times it's about what's going on around the buildings. How are these areas connected? What services are in these areas? So we need to sort of have a little bit bigger picture, so that it's not kind of this idea that the elitistic architects are deciding what's beautiful or not.
But then we also have the fact that is similar to the Valhallabadet in Göteborg thing, that like you demolish something that is outdated in a way that doesn't meet the standards that we have for, in this example with Malmö, it's like this elite competitions and things, right? And I mean, that's true that they might need new spaces, but should it then like automatically be that you're just allowed to demolish a building that don't fulfill like the new standards? Because the standards are constantly just being raised, right? And we can't have like an internal raising of the standards and just demolishing what's left. Surely we can find other uses for these other buildings, even if we do need to add these other functions in other places maybe, but yeah. Location, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because often it is also these new standards, they come from insurance companies often that want to create more specific situations so that they have to take less responsibility as well. So that I understand that the standard for this regulation is maybe not attainable either, and maybe not needed either. And like you can live in a, not saying not wanting to have a substandard home, but as you said it before, maybe there should be some other regulations for renovated buildings, some other, yeah. But maybe on a lighter note, I guess, Julia, maybe you have some successful examples of transformations, renovations?
We were talking earlier about the Danish project. It's an office space building. I'm sure you both know about it. It's west of Northwest in Copenhagen on the Thoraway 29. That's what's a project it's called also. And they have renovated an office building from the 60s and they have remade it as like a modern, more office hub where a lot of creative artists and other people in those fields are having their office spaces. And but there, the architects that has done it, he has a client who is really open to all of the architect's ideas, and his ambition is like no building materials should leave this area. We have to reuse everything. We have to repurpose materials. They have, and I think they like managed it to 95%, which I consider quite successful. And but then he also had a permission to from his client to experiment, which we might have to do in the start if we do these things. So, and if you have to repurpose, for example, the hospital in Lund, that's the way you have to work. In that way, yeah.
Just wanted to add there, like to the question we were talking about earlier, what architects can contribute to as well. And this is a great example, I think, because I would imagine that a lot of people would think like, oh my God, we can't have any materials leave the site. It's going to be such a pain in the ass. What are we going to do with this? But I think for architects, it's a great assignment. I mean, it's fun. Like we know that we can do a lot of different things. We just need to know like the framework, and then we do our magic. Like I think it's a good example where we could shine potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that maybe brings us also to a question to all of you, like what skills or values should we shift towards in the practice of architecture, but also anyone else, like what is needed now?
I know my answer, but it's a bit depressing. So sufficiency, I think. Like not only focusing on efficiency, but also sufficiency. Like we have limited resources, and we can't, like the economy need to change if we want to change society. And we can't just keep growing and raising all these standards and doing all these things. We need to also shift the perspective and the mindset. Like we need to be more flexible in the way we like shape society and our habits and everything. And not just think that, okay, if we find this new material, so we build in a more clever way, and then we can keep going as normal. But we need to also realize that we need to do a bit less and slower. I think that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we have looked into with House Europe is the fact that basically when you build new, most of the budget of the project goes into materials and a lower percentage goes into work. But when you transform, most of the budget goes into work. and less goes into materials because the materials are already there. So I think this is sort of also an opportunity kind of to create also more work. And I have personally in practice worked with existing buildings, and it demands a little bit of a different way of working because you can't just like draw like something and then it's done and you just send it to the construction company and they do it. You have to be a bit more like present, and obstacles arise more in the project because you find things that were unexpected. So like you were saying, this demands a little bit more flexibility in how we look at space, but at the same time you often have very good surprises. Spaces that you didn't know already existed there, or materials, or so it is a big shift, especially because of what you were mentioning, that in Sweden the architecture sector is very dominated by big actors who have a bit more problems into making these changes, because this changes the whole structure of their organization. And where they have also created a business model that is based on we build new sustainable buildings. And this is sort of going a little bit against everything that we are mentioning, because if you demolish and you build a very sustainable building, you are still doing a great climate impact. So it will demand a big shift, but like for us that are working in the sector, we know that this is already happening. There is a big crisis in the construction sector in Sweden. It depends on a lot of things, prices of materials and the economy more in general. So maybe this crisis can be taken as an opportunity to change the way we work.
Maybe you wanted to add something to that as well?
Yeah, I was just wanted to point what the movie we saw already was saying, that we have to legislate to make it affordable. And by making it affordable, we can also make it mainstream, which is what we want. It's not like that renovation is not snob or architect or anything, that is something that everyone likes.
And maybe
That aesthetic, yeah.
no, and as we also said, there is also not a need, but a desire from also non-architects to renovate and create something, make it your own as well. And we have to take it then up on the bigger scale, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm about those aesthetic that we were talking about earlier, about the organizations that rise against the modernism and everything. I think that this is really just a very small and loud group, that ordinary people are not that really against modern architecture. People like that also. I think it's so it's they're just loud, I think.
Talk about loud. We would also like to give the audience the possibility to ask questions. So if there's someone who wants to pose a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, the incentives, I guess they are dependent on what ecology you are in. I mean, in Sweden, as you said, it's big firms, so it's not the same as in other countries. So if you make EU laws, how will they adapt to the different contexts? Because in Italy, as I said, it's very different than from Sweden. It's almost the contrary, how the building construction works. And yeah, and also I had another question about the regulations, the new regulations in Sweden. You think they will help for the renovation, or they will work against renovation?
Which regulations you mean?
There are a new set of rules.
The housing, yeah. Well, we decided to do a European Citizens Initiative because this is a global issue. So it's not something that we need to work on it both in the local level and in a more broader level, because otherwise we are not going to get the kind of changes we need. The proposals that we did were kind of studied by a lawyer that works with the European law. So the way it works is that if the European Union discusses, the European Parliament discusses these proposals, then they would be studied in how they would adapt into each local level. So this is how kind of like the process works. And it would, of course, have a kind of different effect in each country. But it would set a sort of like standard in all the EU countries that needs to be kind of followed by the member states. This is kind of interesting, your second question, because basically, for those who are not aware, like recently Boverket has released a new regulations for new construction that allow things like rooms without windows, which is of course something that we don't want to see because it's unhealthy. But it is kind of true that this would kind of help certain type of transformations, because one of the big reasons why transformations are difficult in Sweden is, for example, ceiling height. If you have an existing parking lot, you basically cannot do anything with it, even though it's a super robust concrete structure. But since the ceiling is very low, you cannot do office, you cannot do housing, you cannot. This would actually be possible with these new laws because they have this kind of flexible ceiling height. So I guess there is a positive side to this. But I mean, I don't think this is kind of like the way forward. I think this should be exceptions, because it is, of course, not desirable that in new construction to have this kind of very, very low standard, which makes these buildings obsolete. Because when we talk about these issues, we should also say that new construction will not disappear, but then it should be thought also in a way where buildings are also flexible and generous and can provide possibilities of becoming other things in the future. If we continue building things like all the housing that was built in the last kind of construction boom, a lot of it is standing empty because the rents are too high, the surface areas are very small, and so when we have to kind of also keep, let's say, the bigger picture that new construction should also kind of stay in a standard where it can live on for many years and not 20 years and like ACAN, they were saying, become obsolete.
No, I just 100% agree on this. Like, whatever we build, we need to build it to stand for a really long time and to be able to use for many different things. Otherwise, there's no point.
Is there another question from the audience? Maybe not. That's also fine. Maybe also we can talk about a lot of the buildings that are, like we talked about, certain buildings are maybe seen as worse and ugly compared to others. Like less people maybe criticize a building that is 100 years old, like built from the Belle Epoque, and more they criticize buildings from the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s that are these massive concrete blocks. How can we maybe also shift that? And as we said like build more infrastructure to make it successful, but maybe also change the narrative of these buildings. How could that be? Maybe also Julia, how do you see that?
Well, I try with my all small means of my hands and my keyboard to change the views of the aesthetics a little bit, but it's I don't know how else to. That's how I do it. That's how I work. But yeah, it's like when in Malmö we have a project called in the harbor called Varvstaden, for example. It's it's where the old what's the English word? I don't Varvet. The where they made the old shipbuilding shipbuilding industry was located, and they made a new part of the city new around that and the water and everything, and they have received prizes for the plan, and it's they have kept a lot of buildings, but just only like the safe ones. Mostly they have kept like the ones from like the turn of the last century, and a lot of the big halls in steel, for example, from the 60s are gone. And that's what I think, that if they have done otherwise, that would have changed, I think, the view on that, because that would have been really cool stuff they could fill that with. So also the politicians could do this if they want to, and I know that they might want to do this in a certain groups, but yeah, I don't know. So I think that's something that's a big miss that they did, and now they are trying to make it sustainable, but it's just the normal housing blocks they're doing there. I think they should have made something nicer in that area instead, more interesting, more yeah.
Also back to this aesthetics, this is also a really good example. And I think also, I mean, what I meant earlier when I talked about aesthetics, I kind of meant it in the same way as we talked about the economic values, that they're always winning, right? And I think it's a bit the same with aesthetics, that we choose the beautiful buildings, the ones that like everyone can agree on are beautiful. But I think that there's also value in trying to see other types of qualities. And for example, in these buildings that are traditionally or by a lot of people seen as not so beautiful, like miljonprogrammet and this like concrete things, there are many other values and qualities that are very strong. And I think like for example, they're very they're made in these like systems that can easily be adapted, because they have like quite large, like they're robust. They have they're strong. You can add on to them, but they also have quite generous spaces, and it's like you can make a lot of different things there. They're not custom made for like small things. And if we start to talk more about these other types of qualities, I think also the view on the aesthetics change with that when we see the other qualities. So I think that's something to think about.
And I think once again, it's important to kind of understand why these buildings are considered ugly. And I think Reiner de Graaf mentions in the movie how this is sort of an attack on progressive values. And I think this is important to kind of acknowledge the fact that these buildings have a certain aesthetic and so on, but this aesthetic also represents something. It represents what was once an idea of like that everyone should have access to housing. And when we demolish these buildings, we are also kind of trying to demolish these ideas, I think. So it's important to also kind of place the discussion where it should be, like, because maybe it's not about aesthetics, but it's about what these buildings represented.
Yeah. And On that note, I would like to thank you all for this panel discussion and this fruitful conversation. Thank you again, Anna, Tove, and Julia. And now we will continue with the program. So thank you so much for listening.